Night School Studios and Oxenfree are the brainchild of Sean Krankel. Oxenfree was born through after-work phone conversations with his cousin Adam Hines. The two of them had wanted to make something together for years, but they didn't know what it would be. Sean was working at Disney at the time, and Adam had just started working at Telltale Games. One night on the phone, the pair started tossing around the idea of a Telltale-like game with a branching narrative that had consequences, but where the gameplay and movement through the world were never interrupted by cutscenes. The cousins would brainstorm once a week or so, just chatting about possibilities and how things could work, asking the question, what would that type of game look like, and how could it be done with a small team? These cathartic post-work phone calls transitioned into real-world ambitions once Krankel was laid off from his job at Disney. Disney had laid off about 70% of the Disney mobile staff after a number of games didn't succeed. It was at this point that Krankel realized he had a chance to turn a crisis into an opportunity, and so he started to recruit a few people he thought would be good for a very small team. The team was very small indeed, since if you exclude contract staff, Oxenfree was made by just 4 people: Sean and his cousin Adam, alongside lead engineer Brian Cannon and lead artist Heather Gross. The game also features music from composer Andrew Rawman. Despite the small team, initial progress on the game went very quickly, with many of the game's mechanics coming together in a few short months. Krankel recalls that during those 3 months of not having a job, he ended up raising enough money from some people that he had worked with in the marketing world to get together about 5 people to make a game for 18 months. And in that really short window, they built a very small prototype of a character walking with 3 dialogue choices popping up over their head, and that resonated really well. This would be the core story delivery structure for the game. With that prototype in place, Night School Studio was able to start filling in the blanks of Oxenfree's narrative, something that ultimately came to form the heart of the game's experience. In fact, the limitations of a newly formed studio's first title helped the team to focus on the exact kind of story they wanted to tell. Krankel says, "So we had this isolated environment, doing something that felt fairly scary, but built more around building tension and not jump scares or weapons. Those narrative constraints helped us hone in on this kind of teen adventure vibe. This was a couple years before this 80s revival Stranger Things stuff, but we really loved that kind of thing, and wanted to build a story that felt kind of Spielbergian, something which has been done to death in movies but not really in games. So we thought that was a fascinating thing to do, something that felt really familiar in other media, but to do it in games." Of course, like any game, the ambitions of a newly minted studio weighed against the severe time constraints, team size, and budget meant that many aspects of the game had to be scaled back or cut entirely. Interestingly, the main character Alex and other cast members were initially going to have powers that included the ability to create reflections of yourself that you can communicate with, or to control time. With some of these ideas, the team realized this isn't really serving the story, and so it was thrown out because it sounds cool on paper, but it didn't work in the game. One of the most important questions the team asked themselves constantly during development was, does this make the experience better for the player? As it turned out, focusing on improving the player's experience is a sensible choice, but it's easier said than done. Halfway through development, the team realized that a lot of the game was frighteningly bad. Either stuff didn't feel scary, or it just felt like lame. Or it just felt lame because the camera was so far away from the cast and they didn't have the benefit of the language of cinema with cuts and close-ups. Of course, Oxenfree is a dialogue-heavy game, as you'd expect from a title inspired by Telltale Games. Its central walk and talk mechanic allows players to fully express themselves in conversations. They can interrupt the other characters and talk over them. They can stay quiet, or they can even walk away from the conversation. Branching conversation trees require a lot of extra writing and voiceover work as it is. Add in the option to silently storm away from all conversations like an impolite lunatic. This adds a whole host of new problems. The rewrite process was pretty difficult, according to Crankle. The script itself was already a massive spaghetti ball of dialogue, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 pages, all in a non-linear format. When playtesting began, they realized things like, this player doesn't know where they're going, or they walked away from a scene without the key plot point in their head. The team had to find ways to sandwich in new dialogue that would work, which often meant a total rewrite of the scene. The branching dialogue and the narrative choices really affect the development of the game, because there has to be a line for almost any moment where you can have these shorter snippets of a character you interrupted saying, "So, like I was saying," before going back into their dialogue. And it has to be appropriate to the tone or to the moment. So if you're in an argument, there's a different way to handle that. At the same time, they wanted not saying anything at all to be a valid choice for the player as well. So the entire game needs to react to if you want to be mute through the whole thing. And characters need to communicate with you appropriately. Telling a great story is already hard enough, but then on top of that, making the player have actual agency inside of that story and make the choices matter is a whole nother layer. Getting the dialogue to flow naturally and reflect its teenage coming-of-age setting was certainly a challenge, but one which Night School Studio more than rose to. While the game has many intriguing qualities, such as its realistic portrayal of awkward teenage relationships mixed with gripping horror themes, it's perhaps best known for the engaging dialogue and the freedom it allows players to create Alex in their own image. This success in characterization has attracted a devoted cult fanbase, inspiring countless fan art and cosplays. So it's surprising that, at the time of release, the game struggled to find its audience. In the end, its success was largely down to live streamers picking it up, because it's very streamer friendly, as well as getting it out on as many platforms as possible. Crankle recalls that, "At month 1 I was scared out of my mind. It was not selling that well, and the reviews were not matching what the expectations were internally. So yeah, I thought we were going to go out of business for the first couple of months for sure, if not the first 6 months." Despite not seeing that seemingly crucial initial success on release day, Night School Studio were able to recalibrate their messaging to allow Oxenfree to live on and find success long past its initial release, and all in the studio's first title. It's the kind of underdog success story that coming-of-age fiction thrives on. So what advice then does Crankle have for budding game developers seeking to follow his example? Make sure that you want to do it, because there's going to be a lot of stress, a lot of fear, a lot of terror. But ultimately, if you have an idea that you really believe in, that can speak for itself, either in prototype state or even in paper state, if it really can hold water and withstand people shooting holes in it, then you have something special there.